It's time for Pure Performance.
Get your stopwatches ready. It's time for Pure Performance with Andy Grabner and Brian Wilson.
Welcome everyone to another episode of Pure Performance. You can probably tell this is not the voice of Brian Wilson, who typically does the intro to a new episode of Pure Performance. This is Andy Grabner, but I'm just trying to do as good of a job as if Brian would open up a new episode. However, what I will not do, like Brian typically does, start with a bad joke or with some rephrasing some strange dreams that he had. Instead, I want to go straight into introducing or having our guest introduce himself. Josh Wood, thank you so much for being on the show today. And also thanks for doing this at a very busy time. Welcome to the show. Maybe Josh, quick round of introduction. Who are you? What do you do? And why are you here, do you think, on this podcast?
Yeah, thank you, Andy. Pleasure to be here. I'm Josh Wood. I work with Dynatrace. I've been with Dynatrace a little over 5.5 years now. Rough expertise in a matter of different things. Get interested by a variety of different topics in the observability space. And I was fortunate to be able to help some of our customers during this CrowdStrike incident be able to get their systems operational more quickly. I produced a couple of different examples using the Dynatrace platform that were instrumental in being able to get those systems up and online. And so I'm happy to be here today to kind of walk through what exactly had occurred, B, walk through what observability solutions can do to help in similar situations if they were to occur again, and then also kind of outline some future steps as to being able to help customers get in front of situations like this if they were to occur.
Yeah. Thank you so much for doing this. And there's obviously, I'm not sure how it is in your life, but if you talk with people that are not in IT, it's sometimes hard to really explain, what is observability, why is it important that we keep what do we do in order to keep systems running, because systems just work. But then I remember obviously that Friday, I all of a sudden get text messages from friends that are not in IT asking me how my day is, because there's this thing going on. And they hope that we're not impacted and then not just have crazy days. And it was my last day of vacation, and I then had to open up the news feed, and then I was informed about CrowdStrike. And so it's one of those events where all of a sudden IT, especially when it doesn't work as expected, really overshines everything else that happens in the world and makes it to people into their news feed that are typically not reading up on the latest in IT. So it was that Friday, like a week ago. Can you, for those of people that have not had a chance to look into this closer, do you want to quickly highlight what happened or just recap for those?
Yeah, sure. And I also kind of similarly figured it out, not through my news feed, but I had to end up paying one of my kids had a babysitter, and I needed to get some cash to pay the babysitter, and none of the ATMs worked across the entire city. So I had to say, well, we're going to have to wait maybe until a little later today. Hopefully things come online. I drove by a couple of ATMs and saw the blue screen of death, and I said, this is unusual. I don't expect a BSOD coming up to the ATM like that. But to walk through what exactly had occurred. So the CrowdStrike itself, it has a very popular platform called Falcon. And this is a security tool that is used to prevent certain bad actors from accessing systems, as most of these security offerings are. And it has two key components to make it work. It has a sensor or an engine, and also a piece called the rapid response content, or the RRC. And if you've read a couple of blog posts in this area, the two kind of work hand in hand. The engine itself acts on the rules, the definitions that come from the RRC, that rapid response content. And the rapid response content defines exactly what they need to be looking at. And you can think of it in some terms of like an antivirus definition. Maybe not quite exactly how that works, but at least loosely so. And that those definitions are always continuously updating. So they're lots of updates that happen fast and frequently, and they're more incremental in nature. This allows their customers to get the best security posture they can whenever CrowdStrike identifies a particular vulnerability or threat. They can pass that information through that RRC, and then it goes on and gets processed by that engine. Now, the engine portion of Falcon is pretty robust. It's more static, doesn't change as often. It goes through, as CrowdStrike terms it, a very extensive QA process, as automated testing, manual testing, validation, rollout, so standard performance engineering kind of things. The RRC, by contrast, has those frequent small updates. From what we see and what we hear from different folks at CrowdStrike, it appears that process might be a little less robust than the engine version. And unfortunately, what happened, we had a confluence of two unfortunate events. One, the RRC part of that, the fast updates, that had a bug. And then the testing process itself, it also had a bug. So there's two bugs that occurred simultaneously. And within RRC, they do not, unfortunately, allow their customers to opt out of those updates. So those updates got pushed out globally, all at around 4:09 UTC on Friday, July 19th. And as a result of that global definition change happening at that moment, that put all these different things into motion. Okay? And we'll go get into what they could have done maybe differently or different what's next options here in a little bit. But that at its core was what exactly happened from the software piece of the equation.
Yeah.
Now, on the actual RRC bug, what was the nature of the bug? Why did it result in things like ATMs or airport kiosks or point of sale devices? Why did it end up with a blue screen of death? Well, the Falcon platform itself has access at a privileged level to the Windows underlying kernel. So the operating system be able to make the thing work. It has that access, and it has that access for a good reason. It has that access to prevent you from being attacked by these different risks that are coming in. The problem with that, however, though, is in this scenario, they ended up getting a out-of-memory problem. And that out-of-memory problem, that in the world of software, that's an exception. That out-of-memory problem caused an unhandled exception to occur inside of the protected memory space of the Windows kernel itself. And then when that page fault occurs, you get a blue screen of death. And that's what ultimately caused this cascading effect that we saw across the globe on Friday, July 19th. So I'll just kind of pause there for a moment just to kind of highlight that. Maybe, Andy, if you had any questions for our listeners to see if we can maybe clarify any pieces on how that exactly occurred.
No, thank you so much for the explanation. I think pretty clear. And also, as you mentioned before we actually hit the recording button, you do an amazing job in explaining things in simple terms. So to recap, to make sure that I understood everything correctly, there is an engine. It's basically deep in the Windows operating system in the kernel because it needs to detect malicious activities. And in order to understand if there's a new malicious behavior, it's getting updates from a central service from CrowdStrike with new behavior that was detected. And obviously, I think one of the reasons why they are doing this, and we can debate about this if this is the right approach, but why they're rolling out these updates constantly all the time, because assuming they detect a new malicious behavior, they write this definition and they only send it to a fraction of the people, which is what we normally do with a kind of progressive rollouts. All the others that are not getting it and are then getting impacted in the time when the rollout still takes time until it reaches them. They could say, why didn't you protect me but protected the others? So I guess there's it's a challenging debate.
It is.
As well. But basically, these definitions, there was a bug, I guess, in parsing these definitions or in the delivery, which then caused this particular component to crash. But because it lives in the Windows kernel, it actually causes the blue screen, and therefore critical machines like ATMs, kiosks at the airport, and I also heard about hospitals. I heard about many different organizations and industry around the world to be majorly impacted. So that definitely, an amazingly impactful change that also showed us what happens if software doesn't work perfectly, which
Correct.
is something very critical. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and and this kind of highlights the next thing I kind of want to outline here with CrowdStrike is the remediation of this issue. Oftentimes it's getting our systems back operational and that speed at which one can do that, organizations can do that. The challenge with this particular style of failure is that it cannot be automated easily or at all. That the remediation of this overall blue screen of death, this boot loop that occurs on your Windows servers or your Windows clients, is that it has to be forcibly put into a lower tier mode like safe mode, and then have the removal of critical files for the CrowdStrike Falcon platform. Alternatively, you could then maybe flash your image with a clean version of Windows that had the correct sensors for CrowdStrike. Either approach, we're talking, it takes many. Ideally, you could get it done in maybe an hour for a server or two. Maybe you can get a couple of economies of scale if you can parallelize a lot of it. But a lot of these steps are you going manually to those servers, either in the data center or to your cloud counterparts to be able to get them fixed. It's not an easy process. And as a result of that, getting these systems operational took longer than maybe other incidents that have occurred historically. And this is probably why this incident will go down as one of the most severe, if not the most severe, outage in IT history, just by virtue of the nature of remediation being so painful and manual and how to fix this thing.
Do you happen to know, because, we talked about these ATMs and these kiosks at airports, are these, I would still assume these are all virtualized desktops, or are they, do you happen to know virtualized, or are these real desktop machines?
I can use it was interesting. I can use the ATM example. I ended up having to go back later to get the cash that I needed for my babysitter, and I saw a Brinks truck. So in the States, these are heavily armored trucks that they have there, and you could see there was the guy who takes the money and is very secure, and then there was what looked like to be a tech guy with him sitting in the truck, and you could tell he pulled off the ATM front, and it looked like what he had is a USB flash drive to be able to boot the thing into a safe mode, and then be able to remove. Either he had an ISO for an image to cleanly restore. That would have been a physical device and not virtualized at the edge, but for the most part, most of these servers would be virtualized. There might be some opportunities to be able to use that, maybe do like a vMotion in the world of VMware, or potentially stand up a new clean image with a new ISO. Depends exactly on the circumstance, but just the one situation where you saw this armored truck and a tech guy sitting in the truck to try to fix the issue with the ATM kiosk, that was pretty telling.
Yeah, and especially if you think about the scale, as you mentioned earlier, if we talk about, one ATM, yes, that's okay. If you talk about hundreds and thousands of ATMs,
right,
where you potentially have to bring somebody that, is from a security perspective allowed to open up that ATM, and then being accompanied by somebody that actually has the IT skills to then safely reboot that machine or like clean that one file that had to be removed. It's crazy. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely crazy. And I wouldn't be remiss in saying, I think the weekend of the 19th, not IT people didn't get a lot of sleep, to put it mildly.
Yeah.
So maybe we can, that's kind of what happened exactly. How can you fix it when you had that problem? Now, maybe we walk about on the how to fix it issue. Like, what are some opportunities for observability offerings or observability postures to be able to help in those given circumstances? And this doesn't have to be specific to Dynatrace, though. Admittedly, you and I both work for Dynatrace. It's that this can be any observability tool that does a good job of being able to consolidate metrics, events, logs, traces, user sessions, being able to understand all those different pieces of the observability puzzle and then connect the dots between those signals and establishing not only context, but also impact as to what those signals truly mean. Now, of course, in the world of Dynatrace, a lot of this is very simple and straightforward. We built the platform specifically to have that, but you could do this either through a DIY approach You could do it through a number of different other offerings in the marketplace as well. So it's not necessarily unique to a Dynatrace offering perchance, but it's something that you could do with any observability posture, provided that it was advanced enough. Now, in the world of Dynatrace, the reason why we built it to have that context at the core was to make situations like this easier to remediate, right? So if one Dynatrace has its observability technology called the One Agent sitting on top of those virtualized servers or at the edge on that ATM or at a servers back in the on-premise data center or in the cloud, wherever it might be. And that One Agent is looking at all these different signals, metrics, events, traces, logs, user sessions, and so forth. Looking at all these different signals and understanding, hey, this server is now offline. And these are the events I saw on that server. And these are the logs generated by that server when it went down. And these are all connected in this way. And by the way, this server talks to 10 other servers or 15 other servers, or it's, if you're the bank, it's the one that talks to the ATMs and it's able to handle the transactions that go from a user trying to get cash from the ATM back to the on-premise data center to handle that API. Those contextual pieces, that's what Dynatrace is unique at doing and being able to do that natively and out of the box. And in the case of CrowdStrike, we were fortunate enough to be able to provide our customers who use One Agent a quick little how-to in a blog post that I had authored that shows a few statements using Dynatrace's entity model, its data lakehouse that has that context built into it, something we call Grail, and then say, all right, this server has CrowdStrike running on it. Maybe it has BitLocker running on it. So one of the other challenges in remediating it is that this underlying server has BitLocker, the drives will be encrypted. And so you have to unlock, basically decrypt the drive before you can be able to fix it. So being able to understand not only does it have a CrowdStrike, but it does also have this encryption service running too. And then take that information and say, here's a list of servers. And by the way, these servers have been recently restarted in the last 24 hours or are still offline. And take that list and say, all right, now I know which ones to go after, right? I have the ability to not only have that manifest, but also a way to sit here and prioritize the ability to remediate these ones for business critical activity. That was a very helpful moment, and it felt good from the Dynatrace standpoint to be able to provide that level of insight to our clients, where on this process, especially given how manual the remediation task was, getting that list was crucial, and being able to then position your folks to fix the ones that are most mission essential, and then work your way down the line.
Yeah, I think this is exactly the point that you made. You put it very nicely earlier that you said, right? I mean, we're talking about things we can learn through observability. So we can obviously we can look at the logs. The logs will tell us, was the malicious, does CrowdStrike even run? Was it impacted by that update? Is there also, I think, BitLocker installed? I think this is additional piece of evidence. But what I really like is that we have the context, like to your ATM example. Just fixing an ATM or 1,000 ATMs will not solve the problem if you also not fix the machines behind the scenes that actually communicate with the ATMs. So like having this information and a prioritized list allows you to then fix the machines in the right order and fix those machines that need to be fixed to bring your business critical systems up. Because I assume many Windows machines that are out there, are important, but may not be business critical to get airplanes back up and running. You get ATMs up and running. And so you want to send your technicians that you have, the limited amount, to the right people fast or to the right machines fast. And then maybe later on focus on those that are not that critical.
100% agree. You can even look at the ones that unfortunately were impacted at the hospitals, where there are certain things that can technically be life or death with accessing certain medical records for a patient. And the inability to do that quickly could be really that deciding factor. So having that easy way to understand what is the impact of this overall situation and what do those systems do
Mm-hmm.
and then take that list and take your team, your finite number of resources, and provision them accordingly to that task, that mandate.
Yeah, I mean, this also reminds me, and we talked about this in the preparation of this call. This reminds me a lot about what happened last November with Log4Shell. Actually, it was already a year and a half ago, where the same thing happened, right? Log4Shell all of a sudden hit us, and then there were two options. You could either fix everything, or you fix those things that you know were business critical and business critical and vulnerable. I think from a security perspective, it's also about vulnerability, because not every system that was impacted by Log4Shell, the Log4Shell issue, was maybe accessible from the outside world, and nobody could exploit that security thing. And in this case here with CrowdStrike, obviously you can say, let's bring the critical systems and all the systems that are connected to it back up, that we need from, hospitals, ATMs, the backend systems on ATMs, and then focus maybe on some back office machines that are not business essential later. Yeah.
Absolutely. And again, this is not necessarily something from the observability standpoint that has to be done by Dynatrace. Certainly, there are ways to pull these signals in and establish context and prioritize context. I will just remark for the moment that certain things, even things that Dynatrace offers vis-a-vis CrowdStrike. CrowdStrike has ways to visualize or know certain servers are there. They have different dashboards. But the challenge there is, what do those servers mean? Are they servers that I care about? I mean, maybe I see a list of 100 servers that are down or not reporting CrowdStrike data, and maybe you could say, all right, the 100 servers that I have on my CrowdStrike dashboard, those are the ones that I care about. Or you could say, of the 100 servers, these are the top 10, and the top 10 ones talk to my banking service or to my, my patient record service or whatever. And that's what makes, in this particular scenario, Dynatrace effective versus say other offerings in the observability space.
Yeah, and Joshua, what I've also seen, and maybe you've seen it as well, as we both work obviously for Dynatrace, and we work with a lot of clients over the years. I've seen and also advised customers when they are deploying apps and bringing up new systems to provide additional metadata that then tells an observability platform like Dynatrace, hey, is this a business critical system or a non-business critical system? Is this a business critical app or a non-business critical app? And with this additional information, you then provide easier and faster answers to exactly that question. Hey, show me, based on my observability data, what are my most business critical systems that run the most business critical apps? Show me how to connect with each other, and show me how to bring them up, like in which sequence we should bring them up again.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that business intelligence is also crucially important here in building an observability practice, where having that business context established in concert with the other signals that you would have, I think is equally, if not more important, because again, it gives you that opportunity in these critical situations to prioritize based upon what business needs.
Cool. So Josh, we learned about, first of all, what happened. Thanks for the recap on what happened and going into some of the technical details on why this blue screen of death, I think it's called, right? Yes, we have what's the acronym? Blue screen?
BSOD, yeah. Blue screen of death.
BSOD, yeah. So folks, for those of you that are not up to date with every acronym out there in IT space, BSOD, blue screen of death. You explained all the technical details. We talked about how observability can help. We talked about the importance that observability is great, but that observability, I think having a good observability strategy, which is, I think, the term that you actually used in the preparation of this call, where you said it's not just about pulling in metrics, logs, and traces, but it's really connecting it and then having a better view on the system so that we know what's business critical and what not, what talks to each other. I think that we just want to stress this fact that having data is great, having data in context is better, because then you can get better answers. Yeah. Are we still, based on we've been working with organizations that are being impacted, are we back to normal, or are people still struggling with CrowdStrike?
You mentioned Log4j, and not to speak too ill, but I still see Log4j in customers 2 years later.
Yeah.
And I know a few servers for a few of my customers that are still struggling to come back online. That maybe an image that they tried to do this manual remediation did not take, and so they have to reflash it. Thankfully, a lot of those servers, from what I've heard from my customers, are not mission essential. So they have the opportunity to sit here and say, okay, we can get to it as time permits, something like a Sev 3 or Sev 4, like a very low criticality kind of thing. But I expect this to linger, and especially understanding the long tail effects of this phenomenon. It's maybe less about the immediate blast radius for CrowdStrike, but perhaps the knock-on effects that it has to the rest of the systems. These IT environments are becoming increasingly more complex. They have backhauls to on-prem. They have connections to cloud. They got containers. They got monolith. They got a little bit of everything. Maybe there's some mainframe. Maybe there's IBM iSeries. And so you have everything under the sun. And so understanding exactly the consequences, or maybe even the unintended consequences of this, are still to be seen. But I thankfully can say, for most of the customers that I've talked to thus far, they are, I would say, 98% operational. Maybe there's some lingering stuff hanging around, and that in the case of those clients, Dynatrace was pretty crucial in being able to help them get back online.
That's great to hear. I saw, obviously, your blog post, and folks, if you're listening to this and you want to see Josh's blog post, we also had a GitHub repository with the dashboards that you built, both for our SaaS customers that are already on Grail that can use DQL or Dynatrace query language. But I think you also built dashboards for our managed customers. Correct. Who are where you provided these dashboards as well. So, folks, if you want to follow up on these links, just check out the description of this podcast, and you will find all the details. The question is, what's next? What can we learn from this? What can other people learn about this, right? Because while it's easy to now talk about one incident for one company, as sad as it is, this can also happen other organizations.
Absolutely. And I think CrowdStrike even admitted that they may have missed the mark on their updates for their rapid response content offering, that one of the two pieces for the Falcon platform, and that those deployments need to be done using a canary style deployment. So for those of you, many of the folks who listen in may have an awareness, but a canary style deployment comes from the term a canary in a coal mine. Back in the old days, when people wouldn't be mining deep into the earth, they would put a canary down there, and if the canary would die for whatever reason, then they would know that there were toxic gases present and that the miners needed to escape. Right? Same concept with a canary deployment, in that we produce a small segment, some percentage of the overall software deployment in production, and as a result of having that segment of the data put in production, then we can see what happens. Does that canary indeed sing in the mine, or does it start to die? And that ability to use real world traffic and real world data to assess that health of the software is a standard practice in the world of CI/CD. One can argue, and I think, Andy, you alluded to earlier in this podcast, that if you're dealing in security for software, that producing a canary style deployment might have its disadvantages, right? That a canary deployment might then cause you to have customers that miss out on the latest and greatest release. And then as a result of that, missing that latest and greatest release, then they are exposed to a threat vector that they were not previously hoping to be exposed to, and potentially could lead to a breach, right? Something malicious to occur. There are pros and cons to both, potentially in a different style, and I'm not here to advocate to what CrowdStrike should or should not do, but potentially a blue-green style deployment where it is very much like for like what they have, or shadow deployment, or using feature flags to kind of turn things on and off. There are a number of different vehicles for them to perhaps consider. We actually put out a number of these different ones for third-party postures on another recent blog post for Dynatrace. One thing that we can do from the Dynatrace perspective that helps on a CI/CD standpoint, and this is not just for DevOps, but DevSecOps as well, is to put different gates in the process. So as code is moving, progressing from left to right, from low stage environments in dev to production, we can gate against certain criteria. And I'm sure, Andy, you've talked about this in this podcast before, but using different indicators, whether it's maybe the number of vulnerabilities in the code or the overall response time of a given piece of code, or the number of failures that are generated on that code, or maybe it has a memory leak. And that's probably the one here where we could maybe use that one in this example, where this did have an out of bounds memory leak, which caused this unexpected exception to occur in the kernel for Windows. These different indicators that could be introduced earlier in the software lifecycle and then be used to enhance and make the software release process more robust. Really depends on what you're trying to do. There are obviously benefits and detriments to doing different positions, but Dynatrace and other observability tools out there have ways to measure and then drive automation and intelligence in those processes so that they can be handled more, not only more robustly, but more consistently too, in the way that has the same ways we're testing. The last thing you want to do in a lower tier test is change the variables of the test. The one benefit of testing a small segment of data in production is that you're getting real world testing conditions. And therefore, you're never going to get a better QA environment testing in production. But of course, the risk of testing in production is that you either break something or that your customers get exposed to undue threats. So there are ways for you to triangulate this, and you can use other observability offerings to make this better as you shift left in the overall software lifecycle. I know, Andy, you're kind of the expert on that sort of thing. I might defer to you if you wanted to add anything to what I might have missed on the CI/CD side of those things.
No, I feel really proud that all the things that you just said perfectly hit home, and it's stuff that I've been talking about for many years. And I also agree with you, right? We don't want to bash on anybody. It is there's just a lot of things we can do, a lot of different options. Sometimes it's easy to miss certain things that are possible. Sometimes things happen because of time pressure, because of simple mistakes. But I also agree with you. Things like a canary deployment, even for a security product, should be possible, even though you may just make a very small canary for a very short time, but at least test it out first on a small subset of users and then roll it out in stages to the rest, or try it out internally. I think one of the things we see a lot of software organizations do is using their own products. The term dog fooding comes to mind, or we like to call it drink your own champagne. Fun enough, dog fooding. I'm pretty sure you've heard about that term.
Yeah. Oh yes. Yeah.
Do you know where it comes from? Because I learned this last night.
Oh, I always thought it was eat your own dog food, and drink your own champagne. So the origin.
But it's interesting where it comes from. So I actually listened. I learned it from a TED talk that my wife was watching yesterday, and it seems the story was told that it was a CEO of a company who was producing pet food. And in order to make a point, he went into the boardroom with a can of pet food. He opened it. He ate it, like let's say dog food. He ate the dog food to show if it is good for me, it must also be good for our customers who then feed this to the dogs. So this is where the term dog fooding comes in. So eat your own dog food because you want to be confident that you're not killing anybody. And it's the same thing with using your own software to prove that your software lives up to the standards that your customers expect from your software. So it's the same thing, yeah?
Oh, 100% agree. We at Dynatrace have been dog fooding or drinking your own champagne for a while. And it's a fun anecdote. I'm going to look that one up later and read up on that. And my wife will be like, why are you reading about dog food at 9:30 at night? And I'm like, don't ask me questions, dear. Yeah. So I put simply, our customers and software companies in general need to have this, and this quote I'm stealing directly from one of our blogs. I think it was really well said, is that we have to have a holistic approach to that third-party risk management that ensures that vulnerabilities in vendor applications don't become that weak link in the overall security posture. So being able to use that quality control process to understand your vendors, and Dynatrace would not be unique. It would be any software vendor for that matter, and saying, give me your risk process, give me the understanding of your testing process. And then from there, I can, if I'm a company, I can understand if I rely on this SaaS vendor for this particular part of my overall IT portfolio, what am I getting myself into? So risk remediation and risk mitigation is becoming ever more important in the complex IT enterprise. And that's honestly as important, if not more important than other portions of it, as this incident has shown us.
Mm. Josh, I would love to say I want to have you back for another episode on the next disaster, but I actually hope I will not have you back because of the next IT disaster. I'd rather like to have you back for some other insights on more joyful things or more, because I know you've been working and helping our customers over the years to really implement a holistic approach to observability, which is a very dear topic to mine, all of our hearts. But thank you so much for coming on the show and explaining, giving us a recap on CrowdStrike, giving us some insight, especially folks, for those of you that have maybe not yet heard about the details and you're interested. So I'm sure this was insightful. I think the importance of observability was a really great topic to touch upon, what we can do when we connect the data. So that's not just identifying which machines are impacted, but which ones are the ones that are running the most critical apps. So folks, if you currently don't have this information in your observability practice, meaning if you don't know what is the difference between machine A, machine B, or pod A or pod B, then this is something you should think about. How can you implement an observability-driven engineering organization where every time some new infrastructure gets deployed, a new application gets deployed, you want to enrich this with metadata that enriches your observability so that you can ask questions like, show me the most critical infrastructure based on the most critical apps that are running on it. Mm-hmm. Because if you cannot answer this question, it will be very tough for you to deal with the next CrowdStrike.
Agreed. And Andy, I would love to come back. I knock on wood. I'm knocking on myself too, just because, the last name Wood. I hope that it's not underneath certain circumstances or underneath duress like this particular incident. Happy to come back anytime, and thank you for having me.
Yeah, and thanks for I should have thought about knocking on wood, of course. I'm sure you heard this though too many times in your life.
Oh, indeed.
Yeah. All right, folks, thanks for listening in. And as I said, this was a special episode without Brian. Brian will be back the next time because he's currently on a well-deserved vacation where he hopefully was not impacted by any of this. And see you next time. Thank you.
All right. Thank you all.